There are moments in geopolitics where the clock doesn't just tick, it runs out. Canada is in one of those moments right now, a 100% tariff threat sitting on the table. The biggest trade deal between the US and Canada up for review, a Supreme Court ruling that could rewrite the rules overnight. Food inflation in Canada spiking to 7.3%, and a prime minister quietly building alliances with America's biggest rivals. This isn't a trade dispute anymore, this is a countdown, and nobody in Washington is telling you how little time is left, because while Trump is issuing ultimatums, Canada is making moves, signing defense deals, building new trade blocs, pulling closer to China, Europe, and the Gulf. Moves that are either the smartest strategic pivot in Canadian history or the final steps before the most damaging economic rupture North America has ever seen. The window for a peaceful resolution is closing. Here is exactly what is happening and why the next few weeks could change everything. The 100% tariff ultimatum, Trump's nuclear option. To understand how serious this has become, you need to understand what Trump just put on the table. Not 25%, not 35%, 100%. A blanket 100% tariff on every single Canadian import. If Canada finalizes a trade deal with China, Trump posted the threat on Truth Social, writing that if Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the US. He called Carney governor, a deliberate insult referencing his push to make Canada the 51st state, and accused Ottawa of trying to turn Canada into a drop-off port for Chinese goods to enter the American market. Here's what makes this especially extraordinary. Just 1 week before the threat, Trump was asked about Canada's deal with China and said that's what he should be doing. It's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. 1 week. That is how fast the goalposts move in this relationship. Earlier this month, Carney announced that Canada and China reached a preliminary deal. Beijing cut tariffs on some Canadian agricultural products, while Ottawa increased the quotas for imports of Chinese electric vehicles, applying the most favored nation tariff rate of 6.1%. It was a targeted, narrow agreement, not a free trade deal. But Trump didn't care about the details. He cared about the signal. Analysts estimate that a 100% tariff on all Canadian imports would raise U.S. inflation by 1.5 to 2% almost immediately. Energy and auto prices would rise sharply given Canada's role as the top supplier of crude oil, natural gas, and auto parts. The U.S. imported roughly $700 billion in Canadian goods last year. A 100% tariff wouldn't hurt Canada alone. It would effectively be a massive tax on American consumers, manufacturers, and businesses, self-inflicted and immediate. Canada is the top export destination for 36 U.S. states. Nearly $2.7 billion worth of goods and services cross the border every single day. You don't blow that up without consequences landing at home first. But Trump has never let economic logic slow down a tariff threat, and Canada knows it. The CUSMA countdown, the deal that could disappear beyond the 100% threat. There is a deadline that most people outside trade policy circles don't fully understand, and it may be the most consequential thing happening right now. The Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, known as CUSMA, is scheduled for its mandatory review in 2026 with a targeted date of July 1st. This isn't optional. It isn't symbolic. It is a formal legal process that determines whether the trade framework governing hundreds of billions in annual trade gets renewed, renegotiated, or terminated. Trump has already signaled what he wants from the review. He has repeatedly called CUSMA irrelevant and questioned its value. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has told Congress that the American side has issues with Canada's Dairy Supply Management System, the Online Streaming Act, the Online News Act, the Online News Act, and the impact of Chinese transshipment through Mexico. Each of those is a demand for Canadian concessions, and Greer is now explicitly pushing for enhanced economic security alignment on tariffs, export controls, and investment screening, language that effectively amounts to a common external tariff against China. That last demand puts Canada in an impossible position. Trump is essentially saying, align your China policy with ours, or lose your trade protections. But Canada just signed a deal with Beijing. Carney's built his entire foreign policy strategy around diversification, reducing reliance on Washington by building relationships everywhere else. The CUSMA review will force a choice: accept Fortress North America alignment or defend strategic autonomy and negotiate different terms. June 1 is the deadline for governments to submit recommended changes. July 1 triggers the formal review. That is not far away, and the deeper the trade war gets before those dates, the harder a friendly negotiation becomes. The window is closing in real time. The Supreme Court wildcard, the ruling that changes everything underneath all of this, There is a legal time bomb that almost nobody outside Washington and Ottawa is talking about, and it could detonate any day now. Since February 2025, Trump has justified his tariffs on Canada using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, by declaring a national emergency over fentanyl trafficking at the northern border. Those tariffs have become a significant source of revenue for the Trump administration, generating tens of billions of dollars. Canada has been partially shielded because most CUSMA-compliant goods were exempted, but steel, aluminum, copper, certain auto parts, those have been hit hard. The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to rule on whether the president had the legal authority under the law to levy these emergency tariffs. Justices on both sides of the political spectrum expressed doubt during hearings about whether that authority exists. Trump has been watching this closely, posting on Truth Social, urging people to pray that the Supreme Court allows the country to continue its unprecedented march toward greatness. That is not the post of a man who is confident in the legal outcome. If the court strikes down the IEP tariffs, the immediate economic relief for Canada would be real but limited. Most goods traded between the two countries are CUSMA compliant, so experts say the ruling would mainly benefit sectors not covered under that protection. Steel and aluminum would be the clearest winners. But the bigger impact would be political. If the Supreme Court strikes down IEPA tariffs, Trump loses his primary leverage, and the CUSMA review dynamic shifts significantly. Here's the catch, though. Experts warn that even if the court rules against Trump, he still has other tools. Section 232 national security tariffs, Section 122 time-limited tariffs, and other untested mechanisms. The tariffs may change form, but the pressure doesn't disappear. It just finds a new legal vehicle. Canada knows this, which is why Carney hasn't waited for the court to save him. He has been building his exit strategy regardless of how Washington rules. Canada's response: the $81.8 billion bet on independence. Here is what makes this story different from every trade war you have seen before. Canada is not just defending, it is restructuring, and the scale of what Carney has moved in the past several months is staggering. Start with defense. Canada just unveiled an $81.8 billion defense plan, the largest defense investment in Canadian history. The explicit goal is to reduce industrial dependence on the United States. Procurement decisions are being made with that lens. Canada signed agreements to participate in Europe's $12.25 trillion defense spending program. It is buying submarines and Arctic surveillance technology from non-U.S. suppliers. Carney has officially signaled that Canada is preparing for a world where the U.S. is no longer a reliable ally. That sentence from a sitting prime minister of a NATO partner would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Then there is the trade bloc. Canada is now spearheading negotiations to create a new alliance among Canada, the 27-member European Union, and the 12-nation Indo-Pacific bloc, a move designed to short-circuit Trump's global tariff strategy and give middle powers collective leverage they don't have individually. Carney framed it in Davos with a line that became the defining statement of his foreign policy. Middle powers must act together because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. Canada has also deployed a 370-person business delegation to Mexico, led by Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, a direct counter to Washington's apparent strategy of dividing CUSMA's three signatories against each other. The message is deliberate. Canada and Mexico are coordinating. They are not going to be picked off one by one. And the economic pressure inside Canada is real. Food inflation hit 7.3% in January 2026. Unemployment is elevated. Businesses are anxious. Provinces are retaliating in their own ways, removing U.S. alcohol from government shelves, canceling U.S. contracts, redirecting procurement away from American suppliers. This is not just government policy. This is a countrywide reorientation happening at every level simultaneously. The Canadian consumer boycott of American goods is hitting Republican-held districts in Kentucky, California, and Florida directly. That is the kind of pressure that eventually reaches congressional offices, outrow. So where does this leave us? The CUSMA clock is ticking. The Supreme Court ruling could land any day. The 100% tariff threat is still on the table. And ordinary Canadians are paying more for groceries because of a trade war they didn't start. Trump assumed pressure would force compliance. Instead, it forced independence. Every ultimatum pushed Canada closer to Europe, Asia, and the Gulf. Every threat made the old relationship harder to return to. Canada just ran out of time for the relationship it used to have. What it builds next will define North America for a generation. If this opened your eyes, like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Do you think Canada folds or walks away for good? Because the next chapter is coming sooner than most people think.